one. We're live on YouTube and on Zoom as well. Hello, hello. Welcome into our monthly Ask a Tailscale Expert. What do we call this? Bonanza? Is that too strong of a word, Lee?
Bonanza. I miss bonanzas from England, so let's call it bonanza. Yeah,
Yeah. So, how have you been? You're over there in Seattle fighting the good fight. How are things on the West Coast?
pretty good. I think we're into mid-conference season, so I did a bunch of stuff last week. We had the big announcement from us around the Series C funding, and it was nice to know that everybody's immediate reaction is what we're all going to go and turn the product into garbage, which was the general online consensus, I think. It's news to me. I didn't know we were going to do that, and I work here, so yeah, but pretty good. How about you? How are things over on the East Coast?
Yeah, doing just fine. We've just about made it through the pollen season over here. Although, yeah, it's just a yellow dusting on my car. Anyway, but yeah, the Series C last week was a big old well, it was a big old surprise to me. And then we've released a couple of bits of content to try and address some of that feedback you're referencing there about the audience. But I think it speaks really to the fact that we are very useful to a lot of people in our current guise as being dare I say, an overly generous free tier. Right from the beginning of my time. So I look after developer relations here at Tailscale, and one of the things that I fight pretty hard for is the free tier and the free users. And even I think 3 users and 100 devices is too generous for a free tier because it makes it difficult for people like Lee and our sales team to dare I use the word upsell people on paying for Tailscale because the free tier just does most of what most people want. So I do understand the fear almost of enshittification, but on the flip side, being on the inside and speaking with Avery and Carney and some of the investors and folks regularly, I just don't see it coming. I hope I'm not being naive in saying that. Like I just don't see it coming.
Yeah, I think you talked about what it collectively says. I think it collectively my perspective from the the outpouring of concern was like the collective cynicism that we have collected as a technology industry around things are always going to go terribly, and I personally understand it. There's been products that I love that I no longer use because of enshittification. I think we have both drank the Kool-Aid because we work here, right? And
Right. Yeah, no
we're
question.
on the other side of the fence. I will say that like my compensation is tied to revenue, so um I am more I am a lot more consistent in my perspective of like Tailscale should be a company and we should make money because it directly impacts me. But I will say that the free tier is an important part of our business model, right? Like our mind share in the developer home lab industry is what drives conversations at the enterprise level. If you ever, come and hang around a Tailscale booth at a conference, the sheer number of people who walk up to us and go, I use your product at home, it has changed my life. How do I get it to go to work? That is our business model, right? And so if we actively, chop the bottom of our legs off to try and make money for venture capitalists that have invested in us, we're ultimately going to remove that business model. And
Yeah.
I firmly believe that, we are going to have to lean into the home labber, the free use case in order to turn ourselves into a respected company, right? Like I really do believe that because otherwise we need to completely change our marketing approach. We need to completely change our revenue approach. Like it's way harder than just actually making the product really good and making people love using it. We're already out there.
Why would we
It's
do
it's gonna
that
have to be.
when we've
I know.
demonstrated for, Tailscale just turned 5, and it's that business model that's got us to where we've gotten to today. So anyway, I think we could talk to we're blue in the face probably, but ultimately the proof will be in the pudding. It's the actions will speak louder than words, and at some point we just have to ask you to trust us, and hopefully, along the way you'll continue to love and use Tailscale and share it with your friends, family, colleagues, all that good stuff. And so anyway, what are we here for today? We are here for an Ask an Expert series with myself and Lee. Please, if you're on the Zoom side, there is a dedicated Q&A panel. Please put your questions in there so that we don't miss them. Also on the YouTube chat, we've got Kate on the back end who's monitoring all the questions and putting them into a document for us today. So again, hopefully we don't miss those. But please ask your questions. This doesn't work without the interactivity. Otherwise, it's just me and Lee talking about nonsense for an hour, which I'm sure we're quite capable of doing, Lee.
I am more than capable of talking for an hour about nonsense, quite happily. So nobody wants that. So let's get some questions in. There is one question that I think came in earlier from Mark. The question is it possible to share an app connector? The use case is you like to allow a family member in Spain to route via my connector in the UK for iPlayer. As a British citizen, I hope you pay your TV license. But yeah, so when you set up an app connector, there are kind of two steps. You obviously have a device and you advertise the connector capability, which then gives the ability to route traffic through there. And then from there, you need to add the app connector in the web admin, which essentially updates your ACL to like advertise the node attributes of app connector for a specific domain. If you've shared the device into another tailnet and you've advertised the app connector capability, and I haven't tried this, just to be very clear, I haven't tried this because I would never want to get around international TV licensing laws. That's not something that I would ever want to do. But if you advertise the app connector and then share it into another tailnet, I believe you should be able to then just add the JSON to the ACL that like specifies that for this particular capability, you do that. Maybe Alex, we need to give this a try at some point. Like I'll just add an app connector to my telnet and share it to you and see if the app connector capability gets shared across. I believe it should work. If you
Hypothetically
have tried
speaking,
this and
of
it
course.
doesn't work,
Hypothetically speaking, yes. Obviously, it's a grey area when we're talking about circumventing geo restrictions and that kind of thing, as so far as content licensing is concerned. But what I would like to add on to what Lee was saying there is an app connector is effectively a domain specific exit node. So in this case, I assume you wanted to use the BBC iPlayer URL. But you can use this for anything. Like I did a video just a few weeks ago on showing, with IP Chicken, one of these IP address like changing websites, just to prove that you can really route traffic through any piece of infrastructure that you own and have it come out through any other piece of infrastructure that you own. A really good use case for this might be something like online banking. So you could use either an exit node, traditional exit node, or an app connector for that. And equally, there are lots of people that use this to connect things like their enterprise GitHubs, right?
Yeah, that's pretty common. Things like Okta. The app connector's job is to protect your intellectual property, right? Like that's the real use case for it, outside of all of the other use cases that we're not going to talk about from a personal user perspective. Enterprise GitHub, you can whitelist specific ingress points, and an app connector gives you a predictable fixed ingress point for those things. So again, to protect your intellectual property is the real use case.
So the answer is, well, you probably gleaned the answer already.
Theoretically, yes. Theoretically, yes, you should be able to do that. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Please pay your TV license and all that kind of stuff.
You got to keep. It's not Greg Dyke anymore, is it? Who's the head? I don't even know anymore.
Can't keep up. Can't
part
keep
of
up.
my
Got too
ancient
much news
history.
to keep up with. Yeah.
All right. So another question came in saying, I set up Tailscale with a Pi-hole tailnet, with a Pi-hole in my tailnet as the name server. And all Pi-hole traffic from Tailscale now recognizes that as coming from an exit node. Is it possible to track it in Pi-hole as a 100 dot address and not as coming from the exit node? So I think this is asking about like, how do I not rewrite the source NAT of packages of packets and stuff like that?
I'm not super familiar with Pi-hole, but my guess is that, well, obviously Pi-hole is just a DNS server, basically. And my guess is that the default configuration for Pi-hole binds to like the LAN interface, like F0 and old-fashioned Linux, and I think it's like ENSP0 whatever nowadays they give for internet interface names. Um, but I think that the Pi-hole server will probably only listen on like localhost or like on like an RFC 1918 address. And so if you like advertise, if you set up Pi-hole so that it binds to the Tailscale address, then you can use the Tailscale IP as a DNS server, and all packets will go over the Tailscale interface. That is my guess here, but I'm actually not super familiar with the Pi-hole configuration because I don't run it myself. Do you run a Pi-hole, Alex?
I use a AdGuard Home these days, but I mean it's the same concept. It's just a DNS server listening on port 53, right? So it's all to do with something called source NAT, I think, and just like packet origin. There is an option in Tailscale's client to disable SNAT. If you ever see anything around SNAT in the command line options, that's what it's for. So instead of rewriting the origin of, so this is typically useful with subnet routers. Instead of rewriting the origin as being from the subnet router, it maintains the source network address from the original network. So you can receive those packets as coming out on your Pi-hole, presumably from whatever LAN that they're in.
Yeah, so like with the SNAT capability, that's generally used for like a reverse path route on a site-to-site subnet, like site-to-site setup. I I might actually have to give this a try. I don't have a Pi-hole, but like I'm now very curious about what is like. It says it's possible to track it in Pi-hole as the 100 address and not as an exit node. I'm not quite following why it would be
Right. Yeah, we probably want a little more clarification on that.
guessing here.
Um,
I'm just kind of trying to fill in the gaps.
yeah.
We got some questions coming in on Zoom. What is the best way to set up two-factor authentication when using Tailscale? I'm happy to take this, Alex, unless you want to take it.
Go ahead.
So Tailscale is we have made a very conscientious decision when it comes to authentication with Tailscale that we aren't going to actually manage authentication on your behalf at all. Lots of other SaaS services will allow you to register with username and password, and then they'll store the password for you, and then they'll have to have a separate MFA authentication on top of that. We have made a decision not to do that because we don't want to be responsible for safely storing your passwords. We believe that other services are better at doing that, and they are SSO providers or OIDC providers. So when you want to set up MFA with Tailscale, you connect the tailnet to an SSO provider or an OIDC provider. That might be Google, it might be Microsoft, it might be GitHub, it might be Okta. The MFA needs to be enforced on the identity provider. So wherever the actual backing identity provider is. So if you're using Google, you need to enable MFA in Google for that user. That will apply across all of your logins for that identity provider, including for Tailscale. But there is no specific way to just turn on MFA for Tailscale specifically, because we don't actually store your user identity at all. And when I don't think that is going to change, because that is a lot more work for us to do when we can just pass that responsibility off to your identity provider. I know that there are occasionally times where people will say, well, I don't want to have to give my information to these big conglomerates in order to be able to use Tailscale. If that's the case, then you need to use a custom OIDC provider and something like Keycloak or something along those lines where you can self-host an OIDC provider. Again, they're much better at handling authentication safely than we are. Instead of having to do it that way. So there is a way around that. And again, you would have to enable MFA on that particular provider rather than enabling it in Tailscale directly. Hope that answers your question. If you have any follow-ups, Scott, please let us know in the chat.
So I'm going to link to a blog post talking about why Tailscale doesn't want your password. And the general idea is for compliance reasons, that just adds a whole bunch of extra complexity and engineering. As Lee was saying, by kind of outsourcing the identity piece of like authentication, we remove a lot of complexity from the Tailscale product, and also the maintenance burden of that is not insignificant as well. Those goalposts are moving all the time. So yeah, if you need 2FA, enable it with your auth provider. If you don't like any of the cloud providers, by all means, go ahead and use your own OpenID Connect OIDC compatible auth provider, and bring your own batteries. So we make it pretty easy for folks to use either a batteries included solution like a Google, like a GitHub, like a Microsoft, or if you are using enterprise auth as well, you can typically integrate your own enterprise auths into Tailscale as well to do the same thing.
Myself.
Good deal. Okay, so is it possible to have multiple domains under a machine or device? For example, server A and server A-SSH. I'm asking because I want to keep the old infrastructure but still use it as a Tailscale until we've cleaned up to use only server A.
Don't understand the question. Quite frankly.
Yeah, so
Let me kind of
let's
let me
make
see
some
if I can.
assumptions. Let's make some assumptions here. Let's assume it's over Tailscale Serve or Funnel or something like that. Can you run multiple domains from a single machine?
I don't believe so. So again, I always like to kind of revert back to how this works, right? Tailscale Serve is going to kind of advertise a bunch of path or a bunch of directories on your machine, and you know Tailscale itself has a state that it maintains locally on the machine, right? So it has a device name and it has a bunch of information about what this IP address is and the node key that is there. All that is relatively stateful unless you specify that it's an ephemeral node. If you want to run Tailscale for multiple things, like let's say it sounds like you want to run multiple versions, like multiple implementations on multiple Tailscale clients. Those things are going to conflict because it does things like update your route tables. It does things like adds a ton device. There's a bunch of stuff at the operating system level that it actually does. And one of the things that we've seen when you run multiple Tailscale instances is you're going to update multiple, like the route tables are going to conflict and things are just going to get really messy. I did once see a blog post where you can use network namespaces in Linux to be able to do this, but it's certainly not like a advertised path for people. And that's part of the C group's implementation on Linux. I think if you need help with a migration, I think we can probably help you with that on the solutions engineering team. So, or on the support team. You can run Tailscale in user space mode, which will not update route tables and will not modify anything along those lines. That might be an option as well if you want to kind of run multiple versions of Tailscale, but it's certainly not a typical use case.
It really depends on exactly what it is you're trying to achieve here. If it's just exposing a service on a specific domain that matches your Tailscale Tailnet node name, then I might suggest you look at a project called TSD Proxy. This is a community project. This isn't a Tailscale official project, but by default, at least, you can only listen on port 80 and 443 one time inside a container, which is what Tailscale Serve is really exposing. And TSD Proxy runs a kind of it's a separate container that runs alongside your other containers. You use labels, a bit like traffic, if you're familiar with that in the Docker world, to expose. Really, it's running a reverse proxy inside TSD Proxy, and then it does the reverse proxying. Like it's basically a reverse proxy. Right, I'm overcomplicating it. It's just a reverse proxy for your tailnet. So if that's what you're looking to achieve, TSD Proxy is probably the easiest way to achieve it, but if there's more nuance to this, please write a follow-up question in the chat and we'll do our best to pick it up a little bit later on. So a little bit of feedback here from Adam. Unfortunately, I don't have a good question because your docs are just too good. So I just want to say that I love Tailscale.
I love Tailscale too. So we have a mutual love there. I love that stuff. Interesting question from Dan. I like to think I'm pretty up on all the changes that are coming into the Tailscale client, but Dan Pollock is asking, when is the release of the Tailscale version that allows you to run Tailscale get command for querying current running settings rather than running debug press? I am not familiar with that being put into the client. If it is in there, I missed the pull request. If this is a feature request, Dan, please open a GitHub issue, and we will implement that because that seems like a very useful thing to be able to do. I imagine you want to be able to do tailscale get its specific pref from the config. I think worth always explaining what is happening here and how this works. So Tailscale has two components. It has Tailscale D, which is the daemon that runs on your machine that like does all of the actual traffic manipulation, and then the Tailscale CLI, which is wrapped in a GUI if you're using Windows or OS X. That will allow you to do things like log in and shut down the client, and that interfaces with Tailscale D. When you run Tailscale up and you pass things like dash dash SSH, it actually sets a property on the Tailscale D configuration to say, I want to be a subnet router. I want to advertise SSH. I want to advertise exit node capabilities. I want to advertise connector capabilities. And if you run the command tailscale debug prefs, it will show you all of the properties that you've set for a particular client. So like it will tell you if you have turned it into an exit node and all that kind of stuff. I am guessing what Dan wants to do here is be able to quickly identify, what is set here. And Dan has also said that it seems to be committed to a dev branch last week. It will be in the next release if it's in the dev branch. So I'm excited about that. I didn't know that. Thanks, Dan. You just taught me something new about the client that I missed last week. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. But ultimately, Tailscale Get will allow you to do, I'm imagining will allow you to do things like Tailscale Get, am I a subnet router? Probably not that exact phrase, but you get the idea. And so that will be super helpful for if you're running Tailscale. You can see all this stuff in the admin console because it will show you what capabilities are being advertised. But if you're a local user and you don't have access to the admin console, you might want to be able to tell what is actually happening with the Tailscale client. So yeah, that's a great question. And I appreciate you pointing out something that I missed last week, Dan, as well. We ship stuff so fast here at Tailscale, I can't keep up with it. So yeah.
We think, and this is hot off the press, that it was merged into dev last week. So we'll have to get back to you on that one. Like Lee said, things move fast. Sometimes we miss some little things. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. And we will, at some point, talk about it and make a big stink about it and make sure it's in the docs and all the rest of it. But for right now, you caught us off. You caught us on the hop. So, all right. Okay. So I'd like to open up a couple of services such as Image, which is a self-hosted Google Photos alternative to my family. I particularly want them to have, Google Docs is just, there we go. You know when someone's editing a Google Doc and someone's name appears over the text you're trying to read? That's just what happened to me. Okay, so I'd like to open up some services to Image to my family. I particularly want to have them do this via Tailscale. Can they install Tailscale somehow and just access Image? This isn't an Image specific question. This is like any self-hosted service on your tailnet to friends and family. How would you go about doing this, Lee?
So you need to have to. They will need to install Tailscale unless you want to get really complex for this and like build them a web interface where they can view it via TSNet. Would not recommend that if that's not your bread and butter. That's probably what I would do. But you would need to have Tailscale installed on both sides. You have two options really. Because of the extremely generous personal tier that Alex already talked about at the start of the webinar, you can add them to your tailnet with their email address. So you would install Tailscale on their phone or on their laptop and log them in and add them as users to your tailnet. And if they're non-technical users, that's probably the easiest thing to do and the most straightforward thing to do. The other way that you could do it is via node sharing or via sharing, right? And so you would create with your image server, you would authenticate that from your tailnet and then allow them to share it into their tailnet. That's a much more complex thing, and it depends on your security boundary and your security, like what trust level you have in the people that you are going to bring into your tailnet. My recommendation for something as simple as this is, get your image stuff set up, install Tailscale on that image server, log in as yourself on your phone so you can view it, verify that that works, and then invite your users to your tailnet, ACL them so that they're only able to like log into your image server and not all your other devices on your tailnet, and everything should just work. And what's great about Tailscale is it's pretty transparent even to non-technical users, so it'll just live there in the background and not really bother anybody.
If your family members have the ability to install the Tailscale client on whatever device they are wanting to view or back up their photos from directly, it's a pretty trivial thing to do because everything will just sort of kind of work. The complexity comes when you exceed that 3 free users. You can either pay for the personal plus tier at that point and add, I think it's an extra 3 seats and go up to 6 users, which is typically enough for most family use cases. After that, I think we don't have a good option besides just jumping up to one of the more sort of business like starter or premium tiers, I'm afraid. But we are working on that with no promises yet. But
I mean, 6 people in a, I mean, it's worth remembering as well, like with node sharing, if you have two tailnets and you can share a node across, that's pretty cost effective as well, right?
yeah.
So, if you have more than 6 people in your family that you want to share with, it's probably a pretty big family and you want to be like splitting it into multiple tailnets and all that kind of stuff, extended family, close family, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, we're always looking for feedback here as well. If you have feedback on the size of the personal plan and all that kind of stuff, please let us know.
Yeah, I also have a video on the Tailscale YouTube channel talking about accessing self-hosted services on a custom domain using Caddy as a reverse proxy running on a VPS, and then tunneling those connections back over Tailscale to your LAN. Now, I kind of yeah, I didn't. I was kind of in two minds as to whether to make that video or not because you're effectively then putting whatever your self-hosted service is out on the public internet, which here be dragons, you know. So, just be careful. Bear in mind there are some foot guns available for purchase that, if you're not careful, will put things on the internet perhaps you didn't want to be on the internet. So, Image is a great example of a self-hosted service that uh, makes something like Tailscale really useful. Um, all right. Okay, another question. What considerations should one make when using subnet routing with a reverse proxy? I want to access my services remotely. I feel like we just heard this one, but it's subtly different.
Yes. So a couple things that I think are worth bearing in mind when you're using a reverse proxy. And sorry for just jumping in. Happy for you to take over if you want, Alex.
Go ahead.
But the host headers that you are going to get to the reverse proxy are likely, going to be DNS related. And one of the very common questions that we have that comes up is like, how do I use my domain name with this Tailscale IP address, right? Well, just add the DNS, the Tailscale IP to your DNS server, and everything will be gravy, right? Like that's the easiest thing. The other thing that's really worth bearing in mind is like if you are not making the reverse proxy as part of a subnet router, that is, you install in Tailscale directly next to the reverse proxy, and you aren't advertising the entire subnet. You will need to make sure the reverse proxy binds to the Tailscale interface, or at least to all interfaces, so that it can actually still like accept traffic over the Tailscale network. Um, and then the other thing that I think is really important when using subnet routing with reverse proxies is that NAT thing that we mentioned earlier. Most of the time, if you're using a reverse proxy that's pretty straightforward, you don't need to worry about the source IP address that you are coming from. What I mean by that is, Alex is connecting to my network and he's coming from a Tailscale IP address. When it hits that subnet router, the source address will look like the Tailscale IP address. And in most situations, that's absolutely fine for a simple reverse proxy. But if you want the source address to be like the origin network address, then you need to disable SNAT. This is really only applicable in most enterprise situations. So I think most people should be able to get a reverse proxy up and running pretty easily with Tailscale if you just follow those basic patterns when it comes to subnet routing.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's that SNAT thing again. It's one of those things. It's weird because
Oh, we should
I
do a
went
video on this.
yeah, I went for many years without really understanding really much about network address translation at all, to be honest. It just kind of works, gets out the way, and as long as my PlayStation had the checkbox around NAT, I was happy. But um I did some stuff last year around like a big piece on Docker and kind of understanding the Linux kernel namespacing and some of the stuff that goes on there with NAT. And I learned a ton about SNAT at the time, and ever since it just seems to come up all the time. It's like I don't know how I ever lived without understanding it. So go take a look at the documentation we have on SNAT, and that should elucidate you on some of the nuances that exist around subnet routers and source origin packet headers and all that kind of stuff. So, all right, should we take this big one here about Active Directory?
Yes, but I think I'm going to fumble my way through. I have a vague idea about this, so yeah, let's go for it.
All right, I will do the reading then. So I'm a new user having some trouble. I'm trying to access some networked folders on my local network whilst at work, whilst I'm physically at home. But when I click on the folders in the File Explorer, Windows prompts me for a username and password. I've tried using the username password for the admin from Active Directory, which returned an error message. I then tried to use my own Active Directory credentials, which also returned an error message. I've tried to give full access in Active Directory to that system, but still no luck. Any ideas?
So, Windows like Samba authentication. So this is what when you go into file directory, you're using a protocol called Samba. Like that's the like it's all NTLM like based, but it's basically the Samba protocol, SMB. And it is very finicky when it comes to like network source. I feel like we're dangerously close to SNAT here if we're not careful. So what's actually happening is you are navigating to the file explorer and it's noticing that you're not on the local network and it can't authenticate you, right? It doesn't know who you are. In most circumstances, when you do this, you have a domain joined like laptop that's like inside the network. And so it can pass all that information about who you are and what you're allowed to do to the file server, and it just seamlessly works. The rest of this stuff is going to be Active Directory specific, and that is definitely not my forte. I've not been an Active Directory administrator for 20 years, I think, maybe 15 years. I've not done any Active Directory administration. But there is almost certainly configuration on the Active Directory side that is stopping you from being able to do this rather than a Tailscale issue. Like if you're accessing this file server from a non-domain joined machine, it doesn't know who you are, so you are going to have to be prompted. You can't log in twice feels like a pretty simple like something else is logged in somewhere. I don't know a lot about what's going on your network, but almost certainly it seems like there's an admin user that's already joined in. Then with the Active Directory, your Active Directory credentials, you aren't authorized to access this system. I would postulate that the most likely reason for that is because of your source address being outside the network. So I did quickly try and see if there is like an obvious answer to this. I think you should be kind of looking at the Windows firewall stuff to determine if you're actually able to go over there from like a remote address. But I think a lot of this is going to be Windows specific, unfortunately. And the source address, again, it looks like you're coming from this carrier grade NAT space, right? Like you're coming from the Tailscale address, and your Active Directory server probably doesn't know what that is. And it has no idea where you are coming from if you're not in the local network. Yeah, I recognize I did say I was going to fumble through that a little bit, but that is likely the big problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm having a chat in the live stream on YouTube talking about pangolin and where that fits into like the self-hosted Cloudflare tunnels alternative, and it's a good chat over there actually. We should probably there's so many things we want to do videos on and pieces of content on, and just not enough time to do these topics justice. But here we go. All right. So yes, I think you did okay with the Active Directory question in terms of like the origin of the login requests not originating from the correct CIDR effectively. So yeah, maybe if you have a good relationship with your sysadmin, maybe they could add your, I don't know, your current IP address to their list of allowed pools, but then it really depends whether it's authenticating with your WAN address or like if that, and then that changes, and there's a whole bunch of complexity there, which I mean, that's one of the things about networking, right? It's one of the things that actually I really appreciate about Tailscale is it just obfuscates away so much of that complexity to a point where you just don't have to think about it anymore. So the real solution might be to get your admin to put the Active Directory stuff on the tailnet and then just anyway. That might be the real solution. All right. Okay. Well, goodness me, chaps. So many questions. We're about halfway through, and I can already tell you, I don't think we're going to get to all of these questions today, but please keep them coming. We really appreciate
I think we're gonna have to do more of these, and I actually feel like I'm like swinging and missing a lot today. I usually come out of these and I'm like, we're doing great, and we're answering all these questions. The questions today are hard, folks. Like I feel like you're
yeah.
really in my like the corner of my knowledge that is not the best part of my knowledge. But keep them coming. I love to be stumped. Yeah.
All right. A regular Dicky Bird over there, huh? So let's do an easy one about subnet routers. How can I access devices in my home network? The document keeps moving around. Okay. How can I access devices in my home network that don't have the Tailscale client?
So I think this is specific to Apple TV. The like when you advertise a subnet router, when you advertise capabilities as a subnet router, you specify a CIDR block, which should be your home network, right? And your router is going to is going to have a specific IP address space. It's usually 192.168. Something slash 24, and you should advertise that entire range. If it's not working, then there's a lot of things that it could be, but it's usually related to like not advertising the correct address space or the routes aren't approved in the console, right? So if you have an Apple TV that's inside your network and you've advertised addresses, make sure it's approved. The actual routes are approved in the console because that's a very easy thing to miss and it won't allow you to route anything. And then make sure that the actual address space is correct. With Apple TV, with other boxes, you might need to enable IP forwarding and a whole bunch of other stuff, but that's actually done by default on Apple TV. It should just work, and if it doesn't, then that's time for a support ticket and a bug report because most of the time that will work. I'd love to know what you're seeing and what you're experiencing if there's not that is not working. Yeah.
All right. Yes, couldn't have answered that one better myself. And the Apple TV is probably, like, if you're looking for a device to send to a friend or a family member to act as a remote exit node in a different geography for reasons that obviously we don't talk about. We didn't discuss earlier in the show. It's probably the low key the best option. Like, it's $100-ish. First of all, it's really
Easy
cheap.
to manage, yeah.
Second of all, your friends and family get an Apple TV they can just use. And third of all, it uses no power when in standby, like less than 1 watt when it's in standby. So you don't have anything complicated like you would have to manage on a Raspberry Pi with package updates and all this kind of stuff. Like the Apple TV just takes care of itself. So if you do need a remote exit node or a subnet router for any reason, Apple TV is my go-to recommendation these days. But speaking of network devices, we have a question here about the GL-iNet portable routers. This chap takes one with him when he travels, and he says that it has Tailscale support included into it. Yes, it does, and it's fantastic. Is there any way to use ACLs or something else as part of the Tailscale product to restrict which devices can connect to that router and which devices they can connect to on my tailnet?
No. Uh, it's got to be done on the GLI net. I'm actually connected to one right now. It's right here. I would get it, but I don't want to disconnect myself from the internet.
Yeah.
So the GLI iNet router is added as a device to the tailnet, right? But it's also creating its own network, right? It's creating its own internal network. As far as Tailscale is aware, because of the way that we set up the GLI net, because the way GLI net sets up the Tailscale network, every source packet that comes from that GLI net is valid. And so what you actually need to do is put the restrictions on the GLI net itself rather than on Tailscale. Because if you think about conceptually what this would need to look like, you basically need to say, source GLI net, like anything behind that. My recommendation is to disable the default ACL so that everything can access everything, and then be prescriptive in what the GLI net is itself is allowed to access on the Tailscale network. That way, you can be sure of like what people are able to access. But if you want to be very prescriptive about what things that are connected to the GLI net can access the tailnet, then you need to do that on the GLI net itself.
They can be a little bit underpowered sometimes. So, like one of my frustrations with the GLI net devices is that it can take a long time for things to apply, and just like the user interface doesn't feel the most snappy. So, unfortunately, I end up not doing a lot of what Lee just talked about simply because the interface kind of is just a bit slow. So what I would say though is you can probably achieve some degree of segmentation using our grants feature and the VIA feature specifically. So you could at least restrict the view of the world that the GLINet router itself has of the tailnet, rather than being able to access everything. For example, maybe it can access just one subnet router somewhere else, and that'll get you most of the way to where you need to go. I don't know, but there's some experimentation to be had there for sure.
One of the limitations is there's no deny rule. So like you're actually going to have to build everything from first principles. So
Hmm.
remove the default ACL, allow this, allow this, allow this, allow this, and you'll probably be in a much better place.
Right. ACL GUI name question time. Are there plans to support node names in ACLs? Example, Minecraft server port number, instead of having to hard code in a tailnet node's IP address.
So I actually asked permission from the product team to talk about this. So everybody who is on this webinar is going to get a sneak peek. The answer to this question is yes. I cannot give any timelines. I cannot tell you when it's going to happen. I can't tell you what the progress is, but the answer is yes. Fundamentally, that is the answer. And then the second part of the question was I'm going to say folks to be gender inclusive because we have lots of non-guys working at Tailscale. You folks should focus on building a GUI for ACL. We are building. It is happening. Again, I don't have timelines. I don't know when this is going to be launched. I don't know when it's going to happen. I have seen it. It exists. I have used it. It exists. When it will be ready for public consumption is up for debate. Sam on the product team, don't kill me for saying this on a public webinar, but we are building it. It is coming. Get excited about it. No more JSON manipulation of ACL files. It will happen. I'm not going to give any timelines because the product team hates me when I do that, but we are building it. So I hope everybody's excited about that. It is on the way. And
We
I have
accident
seen it. It is not vaporware. I have seen it.
we accidentally leaked its existence on a live stream a few weeks ago with Tinku when she was on. So,
Love
uh,
it.
yeah, there was also a Reddit thread a couple of months ago from Sam, who's one of the product managers here at Tailscale, asking for early testers and like feedback on ACL GUI. So it is coming, and when it does come, we'll have Sam on this channel, and we will deep dive into ACLs until you're bored of hearing about ACLs. I promise. It's going to be great, I think, and it's probably. I mean, as a technical, like, I'm a command line aficionado. I'm the sort of guy that goes, you don't need a UI. I don't need a Portainer. I don't need this, that, and the other to manage my containers. Like, I'll happily jump into a Docker Compose YAML file. ACLs, I'll be glad when there's a few checkboxes that prevent foot guns and things like that, because they can be quite complicated.
I personally love the JSON editor, and I love managing permissions via API so much that I built. Actually, I should have done. I should do a show and tell for the tackle thing that I built. I'm gonna do that in the next one.
Yes, you
But
should.
I prefer to manage it this way. I prefer to manage these things this way. But I think we have heard loud and clear that lots of people do not want to manually manipulate JSON files, and I think that is very fair feedback. And so we're going to fix it, and I'm excited about that. It comes up in sales conversations a lot, and I'm very excited about being able to say just use the ACL editor.
Yeah, well, speaking of, actually, this would be a good time to kind of talk about a little bit. We mentioned the business model at the beginning of Tailscale, um, but if you have a feature request for Tailscale, there is probably one route above all others that's the fastest way to get what you want, and that's to buy some Tailscale, but put that thing in the way of buying Tailscale. Would you agree?
We absolutely, yes. We have a weekly call, which we call deal blockers, and it's basically who wants to give us money the fastest. So yeah, obviously we're a business and we're trying to build a sustainable business. And if thousands of home users all get together and say we want an ACL editor for the GUI, we're going to build it. But it takes longer to get that done than it is for somebody who's coming and paying us $1 million a year to build something. So yeah, I think that's very fair.
So another subnet router related question. How do they work? Do you want to dive a little bit into like the packet forwarding and all that kind of stuff?
I don't know. My brain isn't working very well today, so I don't think I do a very good job. Can we do that next time, please?
Sure. Well,
Or do you want to do it?
the too long didn't read is a Linux kernel takes a packet in, sees that the destination isn't itself, and forwards it on. I mean, that's it. That's pretty much how IP forwarding works. So that's one of the reasons that we ask you to enable the, I forget what it's called exactly, but there's like a UDP forwarding rule you can enable as well as a TCP one in the Linux
There's
kernel.
IP forwarding, yeah, yeah, and then there's like GRO offloading. And we also you'll also notice that Tailscale does a lot of work on like masquerade rules in IP tables as well, right? To like forward packets on. A lot of this is just building on the building on the building blocks in the operating system a lot of the time.
Yeah, now I won't answer this question right away because I actually want to follow up to a follow up. So there's a question here talking about have you been in touch with cloud providers to explain that Tailscale is safe? I'm thinking of Hetzner Cloud in particular because I've seen people get letters. I know there was a Reddit thread about that this week and I can't find it in real time. So please drop a link to that Reddit thread in the chat and then we'll come back to that question later on once you've found it. So how can I use Tailscale to establish an HTTPS connection locally, say from Home Assistant running in a Docker to a dashboard?
Locally, is that like local host or is that like within your local network? Answers on a postcard. The, I'm actually going to pass over to you for this one, Alex, because I think you've done the most Home Assistant Docker stuff. But like the basic thing here is you would attach in your Docker Compose file a Tailscale Docker container alongside those, authenticate it, and then it would all be on the same network namespace and it would work. Is that about right?
Yeah, this whole house, this whole house runs on Home Assistant. But yeah, effectively, you've got to separate when using Docker. Local host becomes local host inside the container. Whereas it depends what kind of dashboard you're running. I don't know. Are you trying to run one of these like self-hosted fancy dashboards to get internet points on the subreddit? I don't know. With like Homer or Dashy or Glance, I think was another one. If so, you want to use something called Tailscale Serve and then make sure that both inside the container is on your tailnet and also outside the container is on your tailnet. And you'll do that using sidecars and it can get a little bit confusing. The easy option is to just use a plain HTTP connection and don't worry about like trusting because it's all within your LAN, right? Like unless you're running a business, certainly in my home lab, I do pretty much have everything encrypted and everything on a TLS certificate using CADI and HTTPS and all that stuff. But I'd be just as confident in the security of my internal infrastructure because the biggest threat actor in here is my 4-year-old running downstairs and pouring water over the thing. That's probably the biggest risk that I
Physical
have to
access
all
is
of.
root access, Alex. Physical access is root access. Remember that.
Yeah, exactly. Someone sniffing plain HTTP packets on my network is not really a concern I have. So we see. Maybe I'll be proved wrong one day. But okay. Are there any plans to expand Funnel with custom domain support one day? Funnel would be fantastic in a Cloudflare tunnels type model.
So so part of the barrier here is that with Funnel we issue a HTTPS certificate and we do that via Let's Encrypt. And so we need to do a challenge with Let's Encrypt to like authenticate that it's a valid place. And we obviously can't do a HTTP 01 challenge because the thing is not publicly available, right? So the Let's Encrypt servers, they go to whatever thing you're hosting with a HTTP challenge. And they say, yes, you have validated that you are the owner of this particular thing. And so I'm willing to issue a certificate. And in a Tailscale network, the Let's Encrypt servers can't actually hit that. So we use DNS 01 challenges, which basically looks for a TXT record in your DNS server to validate you are who you say you are, and then we're going to issue a certificate for it. Obviously, the fact that we need to do that DNS01 is we need to be able to validate that we need to be able to add that DNS record on your behalf. And the only way we can do that is to own the DNS domain for that particular thing. ts.net is where everything is done on. Now you can do all this yourself. Just to be super clear, if you want to do a Tailscale serve, and then you have a your own DNS domain, and you do Tailscale serve, and then you want to create a certificate using something like certbot, you can totally do all that. It just isn't going to be as seamless and automated as you would when you do Tailscale funnel. Like my recommendation for those people who want to have like vanity domains is like roll your own and do it yourself. We're all self-hosters at this point, and you could totally do that. I don't know what the roadmap looks like in terms of being able to support things like your own domain for Tailscale funnel, simply because the Tailscale's philosophy is to make this as easy as possible. And as soon as we have bring your own domain, we now need to support every single DNS provider that you could possibly think of. And then we need to support all the different ways that you would add that TXT record and like all that kind of stuff. And we just don't want you to have that sort of experience. So if you want to be able to do that, Tailscale Serve is better than Tailscale Funnel, and like handling HTTPS yourself is the way to go. Funnel is very unique because it actually goes through our derp servers, and so I don't see an immediate way we'd be able to do that, unfortunately, for a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, one option that came in from Ruben as you were talking is it would be really nice to have like a company branded subdomain. So like company.ts.net. And we've kind of got that already with the funny-name.ts.net, you know. By the way, little sneak thing. Like if you've never realized, the funny name is something with a tail and something with scales.ts.net. I mean,
I did
you're
notice
now
that and was
in
like, mind blown.
you're now in on the inside joke. I mean, we are a bunch of incredibly hilarious engineers here at Tailscale. We just, engineers will be engineers.
I will say that every single time I find myself chuckling at something, I go and look at the Git commit, and it's usually Brad who did it. So yeah, I do want to talk about the branded tailnet name for company.ts.net, right? So like I'm always reluctant to say these things on public webinars because the floodgates open and everybody immediately goes, I want my cool name.ts.net. The reason that we don't offer this right now is because it's a manual process to set these up, and we just don't have the capacity and the people power to be able to do this right now. It's laborious for us to be able to set these up. There's a bunch of manual steps that we need to do. If you are on our enterprise plan, you can ask for one of these, and we will consider it as part of an enterprise agreement. But we can't have everybody like reaching out and going, I want alexk.ts.net, because we would just spend all of our time renaming things and not actually building cool products for you to use. So, if you really do, what I've generally found as a sales engineer is someone to go, I definitely need my cool company.ts.net. And we say, well, okay, that's great, but you have to use our enterprise plan. And all of a sudden they go, actually, it's not that important anymore. So that's generally the experience that I've had. But if you really do need mycompany.ts.net and you want to have a sales conversation with us, then we're open to that conversation and we can have that as part of our enterprise plan.
Yes. Now you sent me a little note in the back end saying you want to talk about RD. What's that all about?
Yes. So this is something that I actually talked to a customer about last week, and so it's hot off the presses. So the question is, wait, I can't find it in the Google
Could I
Doc.
use Tailscale with my Microsoft RD gateway so that I don't need to expose my, I assume, remote desktop gateway to the internet?
Yes. Yes. So RD Gateway is remote desktop gateway, which will allow you to like remote desktop into lots of other machines. And Azure requires like Azure, like most things in the public cloud, their default setting is to make this public, and then all of a sudden you've got port 3389 open to the public internet, and everyone is absolutely terrified by that because of all the potential problems that might create.
As they
When
should
you
be.
as they should be, exactly. I just as a quick side note, I'm still absolutely gobsmacked that we're all just collectively okay with putting Kubernetes clusters, control planes on the public internet. We just accepted that it's okay until there's going to be a big RCE that's going to make us all scramble to change that. But I don't get to set the agenda. On a different note, our RD Gateway gets provisioned in Azure in the same way that most other things do, in that you can put it inside a VNet, right? And so when you provision that a Microsoft RD gateway, you can actually specify a subnet inside an Azure VNet that will expose it to, and then you'll need to have connectivity into that VNet in order to be able to do that. So the way to do this is to provision your RD gateway into a VNet and then put a subnet router inside that VNet that advertises the same address space. You can actually make it a /32, so it's only the internal IP address of the RD gateway that is exposed rather than the whole VNet. Although I would make your life easier and do a subnet router for the whole VNet. And at that point, you can use Microsoft RD Gateway via remote desktop only over Tailscale, and it is not exposed to the public internet. So I just did that with a customer a couple of weeks ago. They were very happy. It works great. And you just need to make sure that you have a subnet router in the same VNet so that you can actually access things that way.
Absolutely. Now we've got maybe a couple of minutes left here, so we've got time for one more question. Is there anything that jumps out at you in our doc?
Yes. So the question that I'd like to address is, how do you determine the difference between build and non-build users in the premium plan? It says $18 per active user, and in the FAQs it says that if data is transferred, then a user inactive. But then it also says that administrated users are not built. I think this has actually come up a couple of times over the last few weeks, so I think answering it on a public webinar is a good thing to do. So the way that we determine if a user is active is whether it is connected to the control plane in any given month. And one of the things that it says in the documentation is if data is transferred over the tailnet. When you connect a Tailscale client to the control plane, multiple things happen during that process. It goes to the control planes and says, hello, here I am, I'm alive, and I'm ready to accept traffic. And then it immediately sends packet data to a bunch of derp servers using the stun protocol, which I've covered in like lots and lots of different conversations. But it's basically advertising its endpoints to the rest of the tailnet to say, this is how other clients are going to reach me. So when you do Tailscale up or you connect Tailscale in the client, that is going to send data over the tailnet, and therefore it is considered an active user. The administrator users are indeed not necessarily considered standard users in the sense in that all we do for those is we like remove the billing for a user of type certain privileges, basically. It's sometimes like the misconception is sometimes like, well, I didn't actually connect to another Tailscale client. So therefore, did I send any data? The answer to that is because of how Tailscale works. Yes, you did. You sent data to our derp network. You sent data over Tailscale's interfaces, and therefore you are considered active. And so the only way, if you don't want a user to be billed and have a credit removed for a user, is to not connect the Tailscale client at all. And you see them in the admin interface. It says, Alex has not been online for 30 days, and therefore he's not going to be billed, right? Like it's like disconnected, or we call it last seen in the console. If the last seen date is older than 30 days, that person will not be billed. And we do a consumption-based credit model where if a user isn't actually connected during that time, in that sense of like it hasn't sent any data, then it is not considered a billable user. So hopefully that answers that question. It has come up a couple of times.
Absolutely. I think it's important that those little nuances get picked up, you know. So I appreciate you taking the time to dive into that, Lee. I think that'll probably do us in terms of questions for today. Where can folks go to find more information about how to contact you and your team and the folks at Tailscale in general, Lee?
We have a wonderful support team. So if you have technical support that you need on how to do things, support@tailscale.com. Worth pointing out that even one of our CEOs' core mandates is that everybody can get Tailscale support, and so even if you're a free user and you send a support ticket, it may take us longer to get to it, but you can still get support from Tailscale via support@tailscale.com. If you want to talk to sales, we have a sales contact form. If you want to talk about using Tailscale at work, please use Tailscale at work. If you don't want to have the product be shittified, please have your company pay us money and so you can continue to use it at home for free. We are a business. We do need to make money. It's not a charity. As much as I would like us to be a 501c registered charity, we are not. And so we need to make money. And my paycheck comes out of these. So I'm very determined to make that a thing. If you
So
need
like
to
we
contact
need
us on
we
the
need a Tailscale meme at this point of Tailscale needs you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And if you want to contact our solutions engineering team, these office hours are the best way. We do need to start bringing more of the SE team and more of the engineering team to these again. I think we had Avery on for one of them, but I
Yes,
would
we
love to
do.
see if we can get some other people to join us.
Yes, we do. And so there are some motions in progress to, I dare I say, there's a podcast coming at some point soon. So it's a little less interactive. And I think the magic of these is that they are interactive. So we had the founders fireside chat on the YouTube channel that went live just a couple of days ago, sort of talking about with Avery and Carney, CEO and CSO, respectively, talking about the nuances of the funding round and some of the ramifications and downstream effects of that. But we should probably have them on a live stream where they can actually talk directly to the audience, shouldn't we? So
I gave up on trying to follow the YouTube chat, by the way, because it was just so hectic and busy, and I think
it
that's
was
an
busy
indication of
today.
success. I mean, love seeing everybody here. Thanks for joining us. Sorry we didn't get through all the questions. There were so many, but we love doing these. It's my favorite part of my job at Tailscale is doing these with Alex. So we will see you all next month.
Absolutely. Until next time, I've been Alex. Thank you so much.
And I've been Lee. Thank you.